Alright, so for this one I'm going to be having Nuclearonyx from Xenoverse Kaiju War. He's also in Vengeanceverse, but I'm not using the Vengeanceverse variation until later on in this video, as he's kind of overpowered in Vengeanceverse, and that one's also not canon to Xenoverse Kaiju War, which is his main series. Nuclearonyx, just for some pretty basic information, he's 400 feet in Vengeanceverse and well over 80,000 pounds. And in Xenoverse Kaiju War, he's around 300-ish feet and weighs roughly 70 to 75,000 tons. But he will get much, much larger as that series continues. As for his abilities, he's fast. He's able to pretty easily dodge lasers. He can run at insane speeds. He was able to go from basically one side of the world to the other while swimming in only a day, so that's pretty decent swimming speed. That was also casual. In actual fighting, he's able to react to Tyrantus, who can actually react to his own lasers, and also gamma beams, which are technically lasers, kinda. So, yeah. On top of this, he also has a very fast healing factor. He can heal from basically any injury, including fatal ones, so long as his brain is mostly intact. Like, if his head gets crushed in, there's a chance he's going to probably die, but like any other injury, he's pretty much fine. Now, as for his actual combat abilities, he has his gamma. Well, it's not really gamma. It's an enhanced version of gamma radiation, but for simplicity, I'm just going to refer to it as gamma in this, as I haven't really came up with a name for it yet. So far in the series, they haven't referred to it as anything other than just radiation. That will change. There will be an official name for it. But he has his nuclear ray. It's essentially his equivalent to like Godzilla's atomic breath. Unlike Godzilla's atomic breath, though, this is almost never a focused beam, and also almost never just a straight up flame. It's more of a cone of energy that just keeps going. So it's a lot more unstable than most of like what you'd see from like Godzilla or something from like that. His best calcs for this would be him scaling directly off the orbital grenade, which he does. The orbital grenade is the bomb that basically made him, as well as Tyrantus and several other kaiju in the series. The orbital grenade was able to subatomically wipe out a very large island. This island is larger than like Rhode Island, for reference. But it could have done a lot more if there wasn't like 12 creatures actively absorbing tons of radiation from it. At its full power, could have subatomically completely destroyed something as big as Japan, all the way down through the Earth's crust. So, the calcs I have for this are odd. The lowest end I got is moon level, but I have had some people get it to like multi-continental as lower than that. However, I've also gotten it as high as star level. But the most consistent end seems to be somewhere in the planetary range, so like small to large planet-ish, due to the subatomically destroying it, obviously, enhancing that scaling. Also, my math was not the greatest on this, so whatever, but as the creator of Nuclearonyx, I could say with 100% like confidence he is a planet buster at this point. Like, he could destroy the Earth if he wanted to. He is not like star level, so the higher ends, even if it did really get to that, he could be scaled to that, but he's not like a casual starbuster. That's not until later. At least not Xenoverse Kaiju War. In Vengeanceverse, he could flick a star out of existence, but as for his normal series, he's not anywhere near the star buster level at all. He will definitely be around there soon. As for his other abilities, he can fire beams out of more than just his mouth. He can fire beams out of his tail at multiple spots, as well as out of his back. Later in the series, he will have mechanical enhancements, such as like kaiju-sized machine guns on his back, nuclear reactors to enhance his own energy output, and just tons of other crazy shit like swords, blades, plasma blasters, like all grenades, all sorts of stuff. But that's later. He hasn't gotten any of that yet. But he does still have like the ability to he can heat up his claws with his radiation to deal more damage, as well as his bite. He can poison people with his bites with the radiation, obviously. He can shield himself with a radiation shield. He can shoot his own, like, it's like a radiation vortex pulse thing. But he could also just basically make a nuclear bomb, just like detonation around him, almost. It's essentially the nuclear pulse from, like, Godzilla, but not as powerful, obviously, due to it being a weaker character than, like, most Godzillas. Well, not most, but, like, the higher ends of Godzillas. As for his intelligence, he's not stupid. He's smart enough to actually understand human languages. He can't speak because biological reasons, obviously. But he understands human languages perfectly. This includes multiple languages, including, like, English, Chinese, Chinese, like, most versions of the Chinese language, including older ones as well as older Englishes. He can understand Russian. You can understand a lot of stuff. So most human languages he can pick up on very quickly and understand relatively easily. He may not know exactly what you're saying, but he gets the gist of it at least as far as a hyper-intelligent animal could. He could theoretically do sign language if he was, like, if his arms were capable of that, but, like, I guess he could technically, but it'd be weird since he's kind of he doesn't, his hands aren't human hands. And obviously he can't talk, but he is capable of somewhat communicating with people through, like, movements and stuff. He's also smart enough to know things like nukes are dangerous and things like tanks and stuff. Like, they're not just there, they're not just objects. He can pinpoint enemy weaknesses pretty easily. He's pretty smart. He's smarter than something like, say, Godzilla Jr., not the Heisei one, but the son of the 1998 Godzilla, or Zilla, whatever you want to call it. He's around or smarter than Zilla Jr., essentially, but he could potentially be smarter than that if you, like, take some of his other stuff into account. He's at least on that level of intelligence, or, like, around something like Monster vs. Kong. As for durability, he's upscaling several other kaijus in his verse, including ones that can basically survive mountains falling in on them, as well as ones that can swim in the Earth's mantle casually. He will also upscale Tyrantus, who was completely unaffected to most man-made weapons, excluding, like, nukes, obviously, back before he was even mutated. And then post-mutation, as the kaiju version of him, he was able to shrug off, like, anything humanity threw at him. This would include stuff as powerful as potential copies of the orbital grenade, which would have been even stronger. He could have theoretically just shrugged those off. Like, he would have been injured, but he wouldn't have, like, been fatally injured or anything like that. He would have just regenerated real quick and got right back at it. The scope of the injuries would have, at best, been like a limb blown off and then instantly regrown, so he would have been fine. Now, for reference, Nuclearonyx was able to almost one-shot him with a nuclear ray. That just goes to show how much more powerful he is than the bomb that actually made him. And for physical strength, there are kaiju in the verse that can move tectonic plates and cause earthquakes with simple hits. His battle with Tyrantus and Ingiora, that's how you pronounce it. The battle with those three actually shook the entire east coast of America, and that wasn't just like the country America, but this included, like, Canada, all the way down through Mexico, South America, etc. So, shook the entire side of the Western world, like, instantly. There was regular attacks doing this. Some of their attacks would have been strong enough to, in real life, cause massive earthquakes. So they were definitely, like, strong. Like, they aren't, like, physically weak. This is backed up by Tyrantus casually just straight up borderline pulverizing buildings, like, with one hit. Ingiria has actually just lifted tectonic plates at points, so she's definitely strong, and Nuclearonyx is on or above her level when he's at his, like, best. Obviously, he is the youngest out of three by far, with Tyrantus being, at bare minimum, almost, like, 70 years old. And Ingiria being literally ancient, with her like, I'll just go ahead and put a canon age for her, since the earliest human things of her are going to be younger than she realistically would be. She's around, she's around, like, maybe 500 or so million years old. She's old. Older than humanity by a long shot. So, Nuclearonyx, being essentially a juvenile for his species at this point, is definitely the youngest and least experienced of the three, but yet he was still able to hold his own against Tyrantus pretty well. Tyrantus was able to actually get the better of Angeria, who has literal millions of years of combat experience under her belt, so yeah, he's pretty skilled for as young as he is. Some other odd but potentially useful information: he can see in basically any light spectrum he wants to. Like, he can see all light, all colors, etc. due to the mutations making his eyesight better, like much better. He can absorb almost any type of energy, so long as it isn't like enough to just fucking kill him. Like, he's still going to take damage, but he can absorb some of the damage he's taking and dish it back out. Stuff like light, radiation, heat, even stuff like fire and like Cairo lasers, stuff like that, he can absorb those. Corsars, stuff like that, he can absorb attacks on that level, but he's still getting damaged, obviously. He is smart enough to use weapons, but he rarely will, as he already basically is a living weapon. But he could, like, use a weapon if he wanted to, like a part of a building or something. A tower, he could use that as like a spear. Like, he's smart enough to use tools in combat. He can set traps. He isn't completely incapable of stealth, despite his massive size. He could definitely sneak up on other large kaijus. Obviously not people, because his footsteps are going to be shaking the ground. But he could sneak up on other kaiju by just playing it stealthily. And then, unlike most kaiju, like, say, Godzilla, who mostly don't eat they don't tend to eat much. They more so just absorb radiation. Although, obviously, we know the Showa kaiju ate, which was weird. And Marvel Godzilla ate, but this kaiju, Nuclearonyx, he doesn't like just absorb radiation. He'll eat stuff like whales, other kaiju, etc. He doesn't really have to, but it's a simple biological habit of, obviously, the baryonyx that he was supposed to be before he got mutated. So in his mind, he's just a really big baryonyx. He's not a giant radioactive, essentially, god that he actually is. So he's going to still act like an animal when it comes to hunting and stuff. So that's another thing that could also play into this whole debate. Is this isn't just if he can beat the monsters of the SCP Foundation, but if the SCP Foundation could capture Nuclearonyx. Now, something important to note before I jump into that is there are like 1,000 different versions of the SCP Foundation, each with different things. There's some SCP Foundations that like are basically, they have like no funding. They're like barely able to contain monsters. Like those, they're not going to be able to capture what is essentially Godzilla. That's not going to happen. Now, there's others that have like the ability to transcend dimensions and shit. Like, yeah, they're going to capture this guy casually if they're capturing things way above them. So I'm going to use a middle ground for both the monsters and the SCP Foundation, meaning no, I'm not going to have the unkillable reptile scaling to stuff like the Scarlet King, because that's a massive higher end for somebody who's regularly subdued by a goddamn acid tank. So, onto some of the, like, he's blitzing through them in seconds, SCPs. Polymorphic humanoid, she isn't going to do much. Her best feats are all, like, maybe perception blitzing at best. Obviously, she can rip people apart pretty casually as she eats them. She, like, rips livers out of people, like, one hit. But how are you going to rip the liver out of a 300-foot tall baryonyx monster? It's not going to happen. Also, I highly doubt she's taking a concentrated radiation beam made of stuff stronger than gamma radiation straight to the face. It's capable of subatomically wiping out whole like countries in seconds. So yeah, she's toast. The old man's the same way. His best way to even survive the fight would be just to stay in his pocket dimension. His acid would definitely hurt Nuclearonyx, but it's not going to kill him. He'd just regenerate. And it's debatable if it would even like completely melt him and stuff. He could try taking Nucleonyx's big ass to the pocket dimension, but at that point, he's not locked in there with him. The old man's locked in there with Nucleonyx. He just played himself with that one. The only real win con would be if he just keeps Nucleonyx in his pocket dimension, but obviously knowing the old man loves that place and loves torturing people in there, he's not going to be happy about having his giant fucking kaiju monster tearing everything to shreds that comes anywhere near the pocket dimension at this point. Also, if Nucleonyx knew what the dude was doing to people in there, he's going to help the people. He may be a giant monster, but was actively mostly raised by human beings, so he views them almost like his own species at this point. So he's going to be a little disgusted when he sees some crazy guy doing unspeakable things to innocent people for no real reason. The Shy Guy is actually in the gets blitzed and kicked into space category. Now, before all the SCP fans get all mad about this, yes, I know he has some pretty good feats, but, like, come on. He's also been bested by the SCP Foundation at multiple points. He's been beaten by other SCPs that don't really scale that high when you don't take higher ends into account. He's not doing well against a giant kaiju. Assuming Nucleonyx somehow sees Shy Guy's face, which would be a weird situation. If Shy Guy did try just speed blitzing him and attacking him, no matter how much he really damages Nucleonyx, the Shy Guy doesn't have a way to just completely kill him. Unless he, like, smashed his brain into mush. But, like, it's going to be regenerating so fast that's hard to do. And also, a single blast of the radiation is going to melt Shy Guy. His bones would be fine due to them basically being invincible because SCP logic. Unless you're the statue, apparently. But he's not, like, he can't win the fight is what I'm trying to say. He could damage Nucleonyx, but he can't kill Nucleonyx. Nucleonyx can put him down for at least a little bit. Another SCP that gets pretty casually just mopped is Abel. Abel is strong, don't get me wrong. He's taken on entire armies by himself, but he's also lost to just peak human, highly trained warriors before. He's lost 1v1s to, well, not normal people, still basically human beings. Yes, they had to have a nuke on him at all times to basically control him, but at the same time, they have to have a nuke on him at all times to basically control him. Nucleonyx is a little more than just a nuke. In fact, nuke is in his name. So, if Abel did try that challenge, this fucking monster, he's getting one-shotted with a just radiation beam to the face. The nuclear ray would cook Abel like a goddamn hot pocket. It's not even close. Abel's getting roasted alive. Yeah, he'd come back later because, again, SCP logic, they can't let characters die but Abel is never going to best Nucleonyx unless he's, like, actively in a fight with, like, Godzilla or some shit. And then Abel just hops in to steal the kill. That's the only win con he'd ever have there. Now, the statue is a weird one, because how the hell is he going to snap something that big? Like, how are you going to snap the neck of something that's 300 feet tall and weighs 75,000 tons? I guess it's theoretically possible, as he can do it to borderline gods in his lore, but, like, it's iffy. Now, if he did snap Nucleonyx's neck, he's just going to get back up and he's going to be pissed. You could follow that weird logic where the statue could multiply and shit, but Nucleonyx could also pretty easily destroy concrete. Like, you can make the argument he's going to regenerate, but the statue doesn't have anywhere near as much stuff of being said to be able to regenerate from nothing as, say, like the unkillable or hard to destroy reptile. So, the odds of the statue actually surviving that are borderline 0. Another, I'm just going to put these 3 in the same category for getting just shit stomped by Nucleonyx. Ferdinand the Cannibal, the Water Nymph, and the, I think it's Swamp Lady, or whatever you want to call her, the weird chick from the swamp that looks like a frog. Yeah, those 3 are getting butchered alive. Like, what are they going to do? I guess you could argue that, even if, I'm going to put them 3 in a team, I guess. I guess you could argue that Ferdinand's, like, he's hard to kill, his skin's thick and stuff. Like, they compare him to, like, a rhino. Like, he would get his ass beat by Shy Guy or the hard to destroy reptile. He's not going to do anything against Nucleonyx. He would get stomped on and be over. He'd get, like, eaten alive. He's not doing anything. The swamp lady wouldn't even attack Nuclearonyx, and he wouldn't just attack her for no reason. So realistically, they'd never fight. So if they did fight, her acid is probably weaker than the old man's, as she can't produce nearly as much of it. So she's getting just tail swiped into the moon or something. And the water nymph is something that Nuclearonyx would probably honestly feel pity for. He wouldn't actively try to kill her, because if you know this SCP, you know she gets treated like fucking Meg Griffin by the SCP Foundation. But yeah, I don't see them two fighting. If they did, he would just evaporate her. I guess you could argue that what if she like gets in him and like fucks with his blood, like he has a regeneration factor. Like shutting his brain down doesn't kill him, because his body will just restart it, or the radiation will. So even if she like made his heart explode, it's just back in like 10 seconds. Not even that. Plus he could just start melting away his own body to kill her. If he really needed to, he could do that. So she couldn't beat him either. Now there's some other SCPs that are less creature and more item. One big one is the book that basically writes itself to destroy whatever it's a weird thing. It's like they used it on the unkill. They used it on hard destroy reptile. It didn't work. It would work on Nuclearonyx because he's not the hard destroy reptile. He doesn't have that biological plot armor there. So that is one win for the SCP Foundation, I guess. Now there's also that giant ass eel that I completely forgot the name of that makes that amnestics. Just by size alone, she has a pretty decent shot at just mauling Nuclearonyx, but at the same time, her scaling's weird. And I've heard a lot of people basically say the hard destroy reptile could potentially beat her. If you believe that, then Nuclearonyx should be able to do the same thing. However, with mid-ends, I'd say Nuclearonyx has a decent shot at the very least surviving the fight. But at higher ends, from what I've heard from her, she could potentially beat Nuclearonyx pretty easily, due to being a literal god or some crazy shit. Also, the SCP's version of Cthulhu, I don't even know how he scales, because he's nothing like actual Cthulhu, so I don't really see him ever fighting Nuclearonyx. If he did, and you argue he is as powerful as Cthulhu, he would win. Obviously. Because if you watch my video on Godzilla vs. Cthulhu, you know that, like, even burning Godzilla can essentially get one-shotted if he's being stupid against Cthulhu. So, yeah, Nuclearonyx is no burning Godzilla. So, yeah. Now, if he doesn't scale to Cthulhu because he's weird in the SCP Foundation, then it's probably a one-shot for Nuclearonyx. Now to the one I know most people probably would think of if they saw Nuclearonyx going up against the SCP Foundation, and that is the hard to destroy reptile. That one is an odd one, for the simple reason that the hard to destroy reptile just changes so much from story to story. On lower ends, Nuclearonyx is just flash frying him to a skeleton, and yeah, he's getting shot, he's turning to bones. And Nuclearonyx is just going to walk away while the hard destroy reptile regenerates. Now, with higher ends, the hard destroy reptile is speed blitzing and just fucking murdering everything. He would just annihilate Nuclearonyx. So this is a 50-50 depending on how strong you think the hard destroy reptile is. Now to some weirder ones, we have the mask. I completely forgot what it's been a while since I've done anything with SCP, but the mask basically like mind controls people. It is apparently so strong it might work on the SCP's god. If it's that strong, it could potentially work on Nuclearonyx as well. The problem is Nuclearonyx, if he sees the mask first, is going to blast it, for the simple reason he's going to know it's evil just by looking at it. He doesn't have any like supernatural abilities, but he's pretty easily able to tell if something's evil or not. He has like heightened senses that includes like senses on like what a person is, good, evil, etc. So he's going to blast the mask into death if he sees it first. If not, there's a chance he gets possessed, and that's bad for everybody. He'd also be a perfect body for the mask, as his regeneration would make the like acid just not affect him at all. So the mask would have a permanent, essentially, Godzilla as a body. There's also like red ice shit in the SCP Foundation. From what I've heard from it, there's a chance it could kill Nuclearonyx. There's also a chance that Nuclearonyx could potentially just bypass it with radiation and regeneration at like full extent, but that's something else that exists. Also, the Leviathan from SCP would fucking melee Nuclearonyx just due to the size alone. The thing's like massive. It's like almost as big as like a continent. Like Nuclearonyx can't move that. I mean, he could, but he's not winning a fight there. At least from what if the Leviathan scales as high as it should, with its like how it's portrayed in the SCP Foundation, it should pretty easily beat Nuclearonyx. Now, if I'm missing something and it actually scales pretty low for its absurd size, then Nuclearonyx probably just headshots it. Also, the SCP's God is at bare minimum universal. So unless you pull out Vengeance Verse, Nuclearonyx is getting folded like a lawn chair. Now I'm going to switch to the Vengeance Verse version just to try to scale in some of these higher entities. So for reference, Vengeance Verse Nuclearonyx scales somewhat to Vengeance vs. Dagon, who scales to half of Vengeance vs. Godzilla. Vengeance vs. Godzilla, even in his like base, is at least high complex multiversal to infinite multiversal. You can scale him much higher, all the way up to like hyperversal and shit like that with his blue archetype. However, Dagon in his thermo scales directly to half of even burning Vengeance Verse, who is straight up infinite omniversal. And Nuclearonyx would scale to Thermo Dagon at his like peak in Vengeance Verse. So he's scaling to half of Omniversal. So half of infinite, like an infinite Omniverse. And it's also infinite dimensional. Well, it's actually beyond infinite dimensions. So yeah, he's pretty strong. The SCP Foundation can get to levels around or even above this due to some of the stories just going full on crazy with the power scaling. But stuff like the Gate Guardian isn't doing much against most of the Vengeance Verse characters. Even Nuclearonyx is in the higher ends of the Vengeance Verse characters, so he's pretty much one-shotting the Gate Guardian if it's the Vengeance Verse version. Obviously, Cineverse Kaiju Wars, Nuclearonyx is getting folded in like one sword slash by the Gate Guardian because they're so drastically different power. Now, stuff like the Destroyer of Worlds is hard to scale, but from what I've seen, I don't see him doing much against the Vengeance Verse version of Nuclearonyx. Obviously, just like Gate Guardian, if it's the other Nuclearonyx, he's getting stopped. But Vengeance Verse is probably just shredding him to nothing. He's just annihilating him. Now for the absolute top of the entire SCP power scaling spectrum, and that is the Scarlet King. This is an odd one. The reason for it being odd is the Scarlet King's scaling is so fucking weird, it's insane. Like, he goes from like super weak to super strong, depending on what story you're looking at, but at his best, I'd say he definitely could beat Vengeance vs. Nuclearonyx. Not just due to the power gap being at least there, like, he does have a slight power advantage on even half omniversal to omniversal beings at his best. But also his hacks are usually pretty insane. So I'd say he could beat the Vengeance Verse version of Nuclearonyx if he uses higher ends. At lower ends, I'd say it's a far more even match. But again, due to hacks, I'd give it just slightly to Scarlet King. But at lower ends, Nuclearonyx does have a shot. It's not like he's completely outclassed. Now, obviously, again, if it's the other Nuclearonyx, Scarlet King is melting him to nothing. But the strongest Nuclearonyx has a shot here. Now, to end the video, I'm going to be talking about if the SCP Foundation can actually capture the either version of Nuclearonyx. Starting off with the weaker variant. I'll be using the more consistent stuff shown for the SCP Foundation. First of all, they'd have to worry about the governments getting involved because they are actively allied with Nuclearonyx and do a pretty decent job about covering him up. Or at least they would in the world of the SCP Foundation, as they wouldn't want the global coalition trying to fucking kill him, even though they'd fail miserably, most likely. The SCP Foundation would eventually catch on to this, and they might try to, at the very least, take control of it, or try to minimize their use of nucleonics, the government's use. If that fails and they do try to catch him, they have a couple ways they can go about it. They can either try some of their many drugs on nucleonics, which would all fail due to his immune system making him borderline immune to most stuff. The tranquilizers would barely affect him. Any type of hallucinogen it would work slightly, but not enough to really impact him that much. They would need some divine level drugs, which I'm sure they have somewhere in their inventory, but I doubt they're going to use them on nucleonics, because there's a very good chance it could backfire, because he would eventually develop a resistance to it, and it has the chance of essentially making his immune system even stronger and making him completely immune to everything in their arsenal. At least when it comes to biological weapons or chemical weapons, etc. So their other things would be try to use their teams, their specialized teams. None of them are really doing much, as they've all gotten folded by entities on or above Nucleonyx's level. Some of them could do decent, but not enough to really make a difference. Now, they could also try essentially their equivalent to like the Suicide Squad, where it's their own captured monsters, and even some of their higher rated soldiers sent out. This team would include people like Abel, as well as, I think it's your favorite beer-friendly neighborhood, Keter, I believe. I believe he's a Keter class? I don't know. The guy with the portals that can make stuff if he knows how it works. That one. He's like a vigilante or something in his lore. That guy, and Abel would be there. There'd also be a couple others. They could potentially get some of their more cooperative, or at the very least more human-like SCPs in there, so you can potentially get stuff like the water nymph, polymorphic humanoid, the old man, even if they make a good enough deal with them. You could even argue they get something like, they could just bring something like Shy Guy as a secret weapon to unleash, although I doubt they'd approve that. They could potentially even get the hard to destroy reptiles. He's going to escape all the time anyway. Only hauling his ass there is going to be hard, but they've done it before. So if they send all that at Nucleonyx, there's a good chance he's going to kill quite a few members of that team, and there's also a good chance that they could potentially accidentally kill Nucleonyx. But there is still a chance they could capture. As for how they'd have to contain him, there's a couple ways they could. Either by use of one of their many pocket dimensions, or by essentially making a big ass enclosure for him and just having it lined with a material strong enough that not even a planetary to star level attack could break it. Now, Vengeanceverse Nucleonyx is not going to capture no matter how far you push the Foundation itself. There's no way they're capturing something that powerful. It'd be like trying to capture the Scarlet King, only if the Scarlet King wasn't really actively evil, but was in your physical realm all the time. Like, yeah, he lacks the hacks of the Scarlet King, but he still has the, like, power, or at least half the power, or around half the power of something like the Scarlet King. He's stronger than most of the entities the SCP Foundation struggles to capture in any continuity, so yeah, they're not capturing him unless they actively find a way to make him cooperate with being captured. And Vengeanceverse Nucleonyx is the less cooperative of the two, as he is kind of friends with Vengeanceverse Godzilla to a degree, and Vengeanceverse Godzilla hates humanity so much it's a little insane. He actively killed like literal billions of people. So Vengeanceverse Nucleonyx let most of that happen just because he wasn't going to fight Godzilla. It wasn't because he hated humans or because he was scared of Godzilla, more so he wasn't going to fight his friend. But yeah, like, they're not going to be able to capture Vengeanceverse no matter how hard they try. And if it was like Vengeanceverse Godzilla, like, they couldn't even touch him. He's stronger than the Scarlet King in silver, so like they couldn't do anything to him. But yeah, that's how I see the Foundation doing against both Nucleonyx variants. If you guys liked the video, please consider liking and subscribing. I will be doing a video on Nucleonyx, the Xenoverse Kaiju War version, not the Vengeanceverse version, and you'll see why when I tell you who he's fighting, versus Hiroshimasaurus from Ukrainezilla's channel. That video is pretty much purely going to be made because I had made a post on it earlier, poll actually, and I just did a video with Hiroshima Source before this against Trevor Henderson. So I feel like it matches the trend I'm on right now. But I'm also going to be continuing the verse battles I posted a while ago, starting with, I think it's Goku Black for Space Godzilla, I think. But if you guys are interested in those, check those out when they come out. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.